Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank Mr Steele for bringing on this motion for debate, because education is extremely important and should be a top priority for any government and any community. While Mr Steele might have thought a motion on education drafted and submitted before the budget a good idea, he may have cause to reflect when the devil in the detail is examined. And of course, I note that his amendment cherry-picks some numbers while failing to mention some other gaps. Let me say at the outset that education is and must be at the forefront of ACT policy settings, and it should not be predicated just on raw dollar costings. This year's education budget of $1.229 billion is an increase of over $42 million on last year, and as keepers of ACT taxpayer funds, and the government has an obligation to ensure that taxpayers and Canberra families receive the very best value for their investment. If you read the drip-feed releases distributed in recent weeks by the Education Minister, you may well have come to the same conclusions as Mr Steele did, that this budget will deliver more schools, more school psychologists, more support for teachers, more support for parents. And you would be as disappointed as many Canberra families are and will be to learn it is all on the never never and into the future. Let's take, Madam Deputy Speaker, school psychologists, for example. The background to this appropriation has its genesis in 2015, when a teacher in a government school was so under-supported and so ill-equipped to utilise any other resource that she was forced to resort to building a cage-like structure to protect a student, other students and herself from physical injury. The result was the Shaddock Inquiry and report on students with challenging needs and complex behaviours. A key recommendation was the appointment of 20 psychologists to be placed in schools to assist with the ever-present and growing demands on teachers, many, if not all, of whom were under-trained and under-supported to manage an increasing diverse range of complex student behaviours. The then Education Minister immediately agreed to support all 50 of the recommendations. Slow forward 3 years, and the first 5 school psychologists have at least been appointed this calendar year. The Labor Party election commitment costed out the promise at $4 million, with $1.3 million committed in 2018-19, and all 20 not later than 30 June 2020. But what we saw was a mere $327,000 in last year's budget and a mere $726,000 in this year's budget. It seems the high need, which was so quickly agreed to by the then Education Minister, has now slipped into the category of whenever we get to it. By the time in the never never, when or if this government finally gets to delivering the 20 school psychologists, increases in students and schools across the territory will mean all ACT students, schools and teachers are still under-supported. And nowhere in this budget can I find any allocation for the additional specialist training that is also required, and I hope that the Minister will be able to shed some light in the upcoming estimates hearings. The budget talks about more resources for student growth and has allocated a total of $31 million over the next 4 years to deliver the equivalent of 66 full-time learning professionals and support staff to ensure the needs of Canberra's growing school population are met. But given this year is Enterprise Agreement year for our hard-working government school teachers, how much of that $7 million goes to pay increases? How many of the additional 66 learning professionals will be employed this year? And who are the learning professionals that the government will employ? Teachers, teachers' aides, learning support workers, social workers, teaching admin, or the myriad of other roles that are associated with educating our children? As I said before, Madam Deputy Speaker, the devil is always in the detail, and while the Minister is quick to spruik this boost, she has conveniently left out the detail. Mr Steele's motion talks of the history of investment in schools, and it is indeed a history. I'm not sure whether I should be sad or glad that for the first time in 5 years, Belconnen High School does not rate a specific line mention as a work in progress. Its latest completion date, February 2019, as listed in the 2017-18 budget, will be no doubt met with great anticipation for the long-suffering students and parents and families, many of whom have completed their education without ever experiencing the upgrade that was promised time and time again. Mr Steele's motion talks about investment in new government schools, but again it is in the never never. The new Molonglo Primary School won't be ready till well after the next election on the most optimistic of estimates. And where is the detail about new investment in our older schools? Last year there was allocation under the Better Schools for Our Kids public school infrastructure upgrades program with nearly $6 million last year and a similar amount in the forthcoming financial year. Where is that money this year? Or is this part of the $31 million the budget suggests is, quote, reprofiled, end quote? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm no economist and nor a majority of Canberrans, but in layman's terms, I think that is making new announcements using previously promised monies. On comparing the budget papers for education from last year to this year, there is cleverly little continuity in program delivery, but consistently slick headings on glossy paper. Last year, every budget allocation was branded Better Schools. This year, it is branded More Schools, Better Schools. But repeating headlines and a bunch of numbers doesn't necessarily deliver results. Since taking on the education portfolio, I have been constantly amazed at the haphazard approach to so much in the portfolio. We see independent assessments from agencies such as the Auditor-General that show our students are tracking okay but going backwards. When the Minister is questioned about this, she attacks the testing and suggests NAPLAN and newspapers are to blame. The Directorate's own census data has shown that there is considerable inconsistencies in school enrolments across Canberra, but when the Minister is asked what she would do about it, she remains in denial and is quoted in a recent interview as saying their local schools should be incentive enough because every one of our schools is great. So, in other words, nothing to see here. But if that is the case, then why has the Directorate, presumably under the leadership of this Minister, started reducing priority enrolment areas and forcing Canberra Region New South Wales students to go to schools that have low enrolments, neither of which are long-term solutions? When a school that is designed to cater for over 300 students has an enrolment of only 120, you have a problem. When a school that is designed to cater for 1,000 has an enrolment of 1,120, you also have a problem. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I see very little in the budget to address these structural enrolment issues, and promising to build more capacity now has too long a lag time. Promising to build more capacity now, when the government has been in power for 17 years and has control over new dwellings and major infrastructure projects driving population into certain parts of Canberra, when the government has had no choice but to house students in demountables and use halls, libraries and previously used quiet areas as classrooms, it's just not good enough. The same haphazard approach appears with the decision to provide laptops to students. We have had much fanfare about laptops in schools, but every time I and my colleague, the former Shadow Minister for Education, Mr Wall, have asked about the educational measurement, projection or goal for such an outlay, all we get is a standard response about equity. Educational equity is not whether someone has a specific piece of equipment, it is whether they have the same access to the best education that the ACT has to offer. Mr Speel's motion also refers to improving access to quality early childhood education, and I know that he's personally passionate about this issue. The government has allocated $6 million over 4 years to, quote, develop a strategy, end quote. Actual places might be more relevant. The government's attitude to early childhood education is made very clear in its accountability indicators when it has a target of 4,650 enrolments, the same as last year, and lower than the actuals, with a footnote that says indicator data is just a projection because preschool is not compulsory and subject to parental choice. Well, yes, it is subject to parental choice, but too often that choice is Buckley's and none. For too many parents, especially in some of our newer suburbs, there are no places in preschool, and the Directorate response is to placate parents with the reminder that it is not a compulsory year. This is confirmed to me in an answer to a representation I made to the Minister on behalf of a parent who had been sent away from her local preschool because there were no spaces, in which she responded, enrolment in preschool is not compulsory, and as such, if the preschool student wishes to attend has reached capacity, neighbouring schools are able to offer placements for that year. In other words, Madam Deputy Speaker, not our problem. If this government truly believes in the value of quality early childhood education, and I know that Mr Steele is passionate about this, it has an odd way of showing it, so much for all their hype and rhetoric about how important it is. Prior to the budget, the Minister announced the government would be investing $9.2 million over 4 years to make an immediate start on providing the best possible teaching in every classroom. But where is the detail, and how will this $2.3 million a year be spread amongst our 3,600 teachers in 87 government schools? The Minister on 24 May said in a media statement, with an additional 1,340 students set to join over 47,000 public school students, the government will invest $54.3 million to ensure local public schools keep getting better as Canberra grows, end quote. I am curious to know how that figure was arrived at, given the Minister has previously told me through questions on notice that no data is public and that there are no reports published on enrolment projections. But that aside, do we even know where these students are likely to enrol and whether the schools they attend have capacity to take them? Madam Deputy Speaker, clearly this government has no idea how to plan for the future in education, and this minister has no idea how to plan for the future. So no wonder she has no idea how to respond to the questions about the government, what the government is doing to address capacity issues in our schools. Mr Steele refers to support for greater parental engagement, but I'm quite sure that the ACT Council of P&C associations, whose budget submission had sought funding, will be hugely disappointed with one parental engagement officer to work with schools and parent groups to, quote, support parents to help their kids learn, end quote. We have to take on faith that this will be delivered, as it is to be funded from, quote, within existing sources, end quote. This would be of great comfort to the Council. I think not. Let's not even get started on the decline of teacher librarians in our government schools, an issue that I know my former colleague and previous Shadow Education Minister, the late Steve Doscott, was very passionate about. In answers to questions on notice, the Minister did confirm that currently only 4 out of the 10 government schools have a teacher librarian, robbing our children of valuable research skills to lay the foundation for lifelong learning. Madam Deputy Speaker, Mr Steele's motion is yet another attempt by the Labor bench breaking their arms, patting themselves on the back for a job well done. Well, while they're busy doing that, the Canberra Liberals will continue to advocate for the future of our leaders of tomorrow. The focus of education policy must be on preparing our children for the future, where teachers are respected and supported, where parents are partners in their children's education and have a choice out of the very best schools in the country, where students are in a safe, supported and inspiring community to learn and learn how to learn, where our community will be proud of the world that our children will be custodians of long after we are gone. Madam Deputy Speaker, education is a big ticket item in the ACT budget. It sits third behind health and the public service and has a budget of more than $1 billion. But as Opposition Leader Alastair Coe said this morning, quote, this government is good at spending money, but it is not good at getting value for money, end quote. I strongly support strong investment in our schools and in our students and in the future. But spending more money does not automatically deliver better outcomes. I am not convinced that this government knows the difference.